challenged as he climbed through the inner guard fence, picked his way through the entanglements, and climbed over the outer fence. Sometime later, an orderly noticed his empty bed, raised the alarm, and a search was mounted. Was plunged into darkness when exposed electrical cabling was severed by gunfire. The lone guard in F Tower, there were some 300 reached the fence, ran out of ammunition. Private Ron Ferguson was a guard at the camp, and also the headquarters bugler.
I woke up, it was a quarter to 2. I stood up and looked out the window to hear the machine gun starting up. They were breaking in.
If you want to learn more about the Breakout, call into the Cowra Visitor Information Centre and experience the fascinating hologram presentation of the story. Buried in the Cowra War Cemetery. Following the breakout, many of the camp's guards spoke about the bravery of the Japanese that night. Although the war ended in August 1945, a shortage of shipping worldwide caused a prolonged period of repatriation for POWs. The first Following the capture of large numbers of Italian troops in North Africa, the British government requested some 12,000 officers
before. Yes, I really like this place.
Hello, my name is Claire Simons. I'm a Cowra girl. I was born here, went to school here, and one day when the war's over, I hope to get married here. My boyfriend Barry joined the army quite early in the war. He was fighting in Singapore when the British surrendered in 1942. He was taken prisoner by the Japanese and is still a POW. I pray for him every night, and I pray that the Japanese look after their prisoners the way we do here in number 12 POW Camp Cowra. Although we know there was quite a fuss up at the camp the other night. Officially, the military have said nothing, but apparently some Japanese prisoners have escaped. The camp is about 2 miles out of town and houses 2,000 Italians, 2,000 Japanese, a handful of Koreans and Chinese, and up until last year, around 1,200 Indonesians. This wide, well-lit road through the centre is called Broadway, and this is no man's land, which forms another divider. The war has caused a terrible labour shortage, so Italians are released daily to work on the farms around here. Of course, that could never happen with the defiant, militant Japanese prisoners. The townspeople like the Italians, and I've heard of one woman who had a fling with one of them. Many of the Italian POWs say they'd like to return to Australia at the end of the war. At the end of the war, only it would happen. Victory celebrations in Cowra went on for days. But it was difficult for me, not knowing whether Barry was dead or alive. But finally he came home, after spending months in a military hospital. He'd been beaten and tortured, but he was one of the lucky ones. He was alive. Do you remember me telling you about an escape by Japanese POWs back in 1944? Well, it took ages for the truth to come out, because the government censored the news. It's not easy for us Westerners to comprehend, but Japanese military code is for a soldier to choose death rather than accept the shame of capture. Most Japanese prisoners gave false names for fear that news of their capture would reach Japan and shame their families. The trigger for the breakout came at roll call on the morning of August 4, 1944. The Japanese prisoners were told that their officers were to remain in Cowra and soldiers below Lance Corporal were to be moved to Hay the following day. They did not want to be separated. Having resigned to die, a fanatical, bloodthirsty mood engulfed the Japanese camp. Finally, it was decided to attack the perimeter fence at 2 a.m. the following morning, and to die in action with honour. But they had to vote by marking a circle or cross on a piece of toilet paper. 80% drew a circle, which meant death. Table knives, forks, spoons, baseball bats, and firewood were to be used as weapons. The men were to attack at 3 points and carry blankets to cover the sharp barbs on the fences. At around 2 a.m, Navy pilot Tadeo Minami sounded his bugle, and 1,104 prisoners spilled from their huts, leaving behind burning blankets and clothes set to torch the building. 2 alarm shots were fired by a guard in Broadway. The main Japanese rush was directed at the unmanned Vickers machine gun, mounted on a trailer outside the perimeter fence. The attackers intended using it against the garrison. They were in a race against 2 Australian privates, Ben Hardy and Ralph Johns, wearing great coats over striped flannelette pyjamas and unlaced army boots. Waves of Japanese were clambering over the fence when Private Hardy opened fire. The Vickers left 23 bodies grotesquely draped on the barbed wire. 6 more were killed as they approached the third fence, and 15 died trying to cross the last hurdle. It was a suicide charge. About 150 yards south, another mob of prisoners were scaling the fence. But the lone guard in F Tower was armed with an Owen gun and a pitiful amount of ammunition. More than 300 prisoners escaped here, and only 5 were killed. 3 flares lit up the night sky to alert the nearby infantry camp. Gunfire was coming from every direction, and ricocheting bullets wounded 3 members of the garrison. Private Hardy continued to rake the ground in front of him with fire as the POWs swarmed around the gun trailer. They were now too close for the unwieldy Vickers. "Get going, Ralph," Ben Hardy screamed at his number 2. Ralph Jones attempted to dive over the heads of the frenzied Japanese, but they caught him and clubbed him with baseball bats and stabbed him repeatedly. Hardy was disabling the Vickers as the rioters clubbed him to death and left him on the trailer floor. They then turned the gun around towards the garrison, but it wouldn't fire. Private Jones staggered 80 yards to the nearest hut. "They got us," he gasped, and fell dead. Neither Jones nor Hardy had fired a weapon in combat before. Private Charles Shepherd rushed from the guard room and was stabbed in the heart by a POW. He died instantly. Tadeo Minami, whose bugle signalled the attack, was among the group that broke through on Broadway. He took a bullet in the chest and fell into the gutter. He smoked a cigarette and then cut his own throat with a sharpened table knife. At dawn on the frosty morning of August 5, 1944, the counting began. But it would take days of searching the countryside before the full horrific tally would be known. A total of 334 prisoners escaped, 107 were wounded, and 231 died. 3 Australians were killed during the breakout, and a 4th Lieutenant Harry Doncaster, an instructor at the military training camp, was stabbed and clubbed to death by a POW on the evening of August 5 while searching for escapees. Privates Hardy and Jones were each awarded a posthumous George Cross in September 1950 for outstanding gallantry against the fanatical Japanese. Fanatical Japanese. The sadness is that not all Japanese POWs were hardline fanatics. Many of the prisoners, such as Masaru Moriki, Marakuni Takahara, and Akira Kanazawa, the man who led the breakout, have since spoken out. One of them said that Cowra was where he learnt the essence of human life.
The Cowra community will never forget the tragic breakout, and there is much about our town that reminds us of the event, and also demonstrates the reconciliation that has taken place. The camp area is now a permanent heritage site. We have a cherry tree avenue and an annual cherry blossom festival. There is also the war cemetery, where all Japanese civilian and military who died in Australia in World War II are buried, plus the Japanese Garden and Cultural Centre and the Seikei School Exchange Programme. On the pavement outside the Cowra Civic Centre is Australia's World Peace Bell, which is a replica of the one outside the United Nations headquarters in New York. Cowra remembers.
Oh, I'm sorry. I almost forgot to tell you about Barry. Well, he got married here in Cowra on the 24th of September 1949. To me. Our only wish now is to raise our 2 children in a world governed by peace and reconciliation.